listen, boys and girls, I'm going to confess to you right now, I had no idea your play was about the wise men. Isn't that amazing? Yet, God, in his amazingness, has given me this passage to preach on when your whole play has been about the greatest gift ever. And it is indeed about the greatest gift ever. And we're going to look a little bit more closely at this real-life account from the Bible. It's not just make-up fairy tales. It's actually real-life events. And as we look at this account, what we're going to do is we're going to trace the response of two kinds of people. We're going to look at the response of Herod, and we're going to look at the response of those wise men. You see, Herod saw this as troubling news, and that's the first thing I want to point out this morning. Herod saw this as troubling news. Matthew begins this part of his account by telling us about these bunch of foreigners who came from a long way, and they were asking in the city of Jerusalem to see the newborn king. But no one's heard of it. Look at verse 1 with me. Let me read it to you again. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi, or wise men, from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, these guys caused the whole city to be in a turmoil, a troubling turmoil. Everyone was talking about the things they were asking for. They were talking about those guys. Look at what verse 3 says. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. He was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, it reminds me of many years ago when I was living in Cardiff. A very famous pop singer decided to do a spur-of-the-moment public performance on the main high street of the city. So rumors were kind of circulated on radio. Back in those days, we didn't have mobile phones. That's how long ago it was. And by the time, yes, John Bon Jovi, do you remember him, arrived on a hastily erected stage on the high street, around 5,000 people had gathered. They'd heard the news. They'd whipped down to Cardiff to see him, and he just did this 20-minute live performance in Cardiff. And for those of you who don't know who John Bon Jovi is, just ask your parents or even grandparents. In terms of popularity, he's modern-day equivalent of Ed Sheeran. But the whole city was buzzing. Everyone was talking about it. People were asking, did you hear about John Bon Jovi's live performance on the high street? Were you there? How close were you to the stage? Excitement was sky high afterwards for many days. Everyone had a story. Even the people who weren't there could see the kerfuffle and the crowds. But others were less pleased. They were mumbling about how much it cost the city to do that publicity stunt. I remember one person was annoyed because it meant that they were late for an interview, and the streets were jammed with traffic for hours afterwards. But it's a good example of something that causes a turmoil in a city. In the case of Cardiff a few years ago, it was what everyone's talking about. It was a good turmoil, but in Herod's day, actually, it caused a troubling turmoil, because even the king heard it, and he was disturbed by it. And for Herod to be disturbed by this news, it was a bad thing. Why? Because he was constantly worried that people around him wanted his power and were plotting to kill him. So when he hears these wise men announce the birth of a new king, he instantly feels threatened. And history tells us he had a habit of killing anyone who threatened him and disturbed him. So Herod wasn't expecting this news, and it was the last thing he wanted to hear. And that bad feeling gets even worse for him, because not only did these wise men rock up looking for a new king, but there's also this star in the heavens that's kind of confirming their opinion. And then he adds to the whole troubled feeling in his heart, because he gets all his religious leaders together and they do a little bit of a search through the Old Testament scriptures written hundreds of years before. And this is what they find. Look at verse 4 with me. When he'd called together the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem, Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. In other words, far from taking these wise men as being a bunch of foreign guys babbling about conspiracy theories or UFOs, he's taking them seriously. Their quest was not just a false star chart reading. They were following a sign in the heavens. And Herod kind of puts all what they're saying together and all what his religious leaders are saying together. And he kind of says, wow, this must be the Messiah. God come to the world. No way. Someone who is so troubled by it puts two and two together and realizes who is being born. Verse 8, go search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so I too can go and worship him. You can almost see him sharpening his knives, can't you? He's got really worried about Jesus. And he kind of spins a little bit of a tale. I'd like to see him as well. But rather than like the wise men who want to see him to worship him, Herod actually wants Jesus dead. He'd read what the Bible said about Jesus. He'd seen what the sign said about Jesus, the star. And that was troubling for him. That's Herod's response. It's troubling news. But the wise men saw this news as joyful news. That's the second group of people I want to look at. Herod wasn't the only one who discovered Jesus wasn't what they wanted or expected. The wise men were in the same place too. Listen, imagine what the real guys felt when they arrived at Jerusalem looking for a king, and nobody's heard of it. It kind of feels like they've come a very long way and they've got it all wrong. They've arrived at the capital city. That's obviously where kings are born, isn't it? They go to the palace. That's obviously where you'd expect it to all be happening. You'd expect the king to be the father of the new king. And I wonder whether they're kind of shaking their star charts to just make sure that all the bits are in the right place. Honestly, they've got it so spectacularly wrong. There's no even hint of Jesus being the Messiah or anything in Jerusalem. No one's heard of it. Everyone's confused. It feels like for them, they've arrived and they've got the wrong end of the stick. What do they do? What do they do? Well, they carry on their search. And he's not born in a palace that they were expecting. He's not born in Jerusalem that they were expecting. They have to change all their expectations, all their assumptions, and they have to go and do things the way the signs tell them to do things. In other words, they go to scabby little Bethlehem. I promise you, it's not like all the Christmas cards say, a beautiful little town with beautiful palm trees and a lovely star floating beautifully above it. It wasn't like that. Bethlehem was totally unknown scabbo. Trust me, nobody wanted to live in Bethlehem, let alone be born there. But that's where the sign told them to go, the star. And they have to change their expectations. They leave the palace, they leave the city, they go to Bethlehem. They find, actually, rather than being born in the best scabby house of Bethlehem, he's born in the lowest place. He's put in a manger, a feeding trough. That's just not what they're expecting. And yet, they change all their assumptions and they worship him. Verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and they worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. They worshipped him. Isn't that amazing? A little baby who just exactly did what he wasn't expected to do. But they see what the sign and the scriptures say, and they worship him. They're joyful. They give him those gifts. And so those are the two responses, really. Matthew wants his readers, as we're reading it, to kind of analyze this and just sort of say, well, what about my response? When I hear the news about Jesus, do you know Jesus is always going to provoke a response in us? And in many ways, both of these sets of people are completely surprised, aren't they, by Jesus' birth? So Herod, for example, he wasn't expecting another king to come along. He wasn't expecting someone to make his position feel challenged. And actually, when he hears about this baby, he has to control Jesus. He has to kind of get the insider info so he can do what he wants with this baby. For the wise men, though, they weren't expecting at all everything they found out about Jesus. They weren't expecting Jesus to be born in scabby Bethlehem and laid in a manger. And yet, rather than trying to control Jesus, they realized more and more as information about Jesus pointed to the fact that he was more and more and more important, way more important than they ever could have imagined or realized. What they did is they changed their whole worldview, the way they looked at the world, and they followed the signs. They listened to the Bible about where he was born, and they followed, and they found him, and they worshipped. It's mind-blowing. And what Matthew's wanting us to do is, listen, when Jesus appears on our radar, how are we going to respond? What are our preconceptions about Jesus? What's our response to this account going to be? Do you know, we can respond like Herod. Not that we would be so evil as to want Jesus actually dead, but listen, it might be that you're just feeling a little bit uncomfortable about this whole Jesus stuff. And actually, you know, in your mind, you're kind of turning on the filters. It's nice to hear about the babies. It's nice to see the children do their little thing. But let's leave it there, please. Let's not take it too seriously. And people do that a lot at Christmas. You know, Jesus at Christmas in modern-day Britain, we tolerate him at best, cancel him at worst. You know, for others of us, Jesus has got to stick to strict religious formulae. And we put him in a little jack-in-a-box, and we let him pop out at Christmas and then tuck him back in come New Year, because actually Jesus is reserved for Easter and Christmas. And then again, for others, we just don't see the point. You know, bless them, Christians, you do go on a bit about this Jesus person, and you know, let's be honest, Christianity taken seriously is either conservative or extremist, and I'm neither. So hey, let's just let it pass. And can you see how culture today tries to control Jesus like Herod? Not in a vicious way like Herod, but just in a sense of, you know, let's just keep him in his place. And that's our response. When Jesus appears on the radar, we try to keep him in his place. On the other hand, those wise men, they wander into Jerusalem and they kick up a fuss, don't they? All Jerusalem's really, really, really are disturbed and troubled by what they say. But they've got the right heart. That's what I love about them. Rather than trying to control Jesus, actually, they see the place that Jesus has to have in their life. You know, the more they find out about Jesus, the more important they realize he is. And the more they realize he has got to control them. Their preconceptions of who Jesus is and what he's come to do change till rather than just searching for him, they're desperately searching for him, and they find him and they worship him. And they challenge us. Just like they found out more and more about Jesus as their search for him went on. Actually, here's the invitation. How about us? Will we do the same? And like those wise men, we might feel like complete outsiders. I realize that for many of us who are new to church this morning, some of the songs we've sung, you know, they aren't traditional carols that we remember growing up. But you know, that's a preconception that says, okay, maybe I've got to listen to what those carols say. Heaven has come to us. Beautiful words. People of modern day just given them to us. We might feel like complete outsiders, but listen to the invitation. Jesus has come, and he's come to give us a relationship with God. And so just like those wise men, we can search for him. Why? Because he's the come and meet me God. That's wonderful, isn't it? That we can do God in a modern way. We don't have to have religious boxes. We can do God on the train. We can just read what the Bible says to us about Jesus, and we understand he loves us. That's the come and meet me God. And he's saying that actually, as we go to meet him, we find out he's the king, not that we want, but that we need. He's alive today. He's the king of God's kingdom. That's why those guys worshipped him. And all who come to him ever since have realized he is the come and meet me God. Not the one we want necessarily, but the one we need. Someone to deal with our hearts. And the invitation of this passage, as Matthew writes it, is simply this. Just follow the heart. Search him out. Find out until you worship him. They realized he was worth the quest, worth their gifts, worth their worship. That's what the children have said this morning. He is the best gift ever. And will you do that this morning if you've not done it before? We can take a step back. And I love it when children do nativity services because all their little faces are doing something different, and you've got the little whispered cues and everything that's kind of funny and wonderful and joyful about nativities. But the story is wonderful, isn't it? Three guys, well, probably three guys. We don't know for certain, but three guys who find out who this Jesus is, and not only find him. It's not just a quest to find him; it's a quest to worship him. And that's the challenge for us too. We've got these two responses. Will we try to control Jesus like Herod did? Or will we allow Jesus to control us? Change our preconceptions, change our worldview, change our thoughts about God? And will we find him out, search him out? Listen, there are a couple of ways you can do that. We've put one of these booklets on everyone's chair, well, every alternate chair. Take it home if you're not sure, and just tuck it in your handbag or your breast pocket or whatever. Just take it home and read it. Get yourself a good glass of port or whatever, and just sit on the sofa. And it's a wonderful description of the good news that I've just taken a few minutes to share. You can also, we've got coming up in the new year a Something Better course. That's just 3 weeks that helps us find out, a bit like the wise men did, helps us search out who Jesus is, how he changes us, how he brings us into a relationship with God. If you're not sure, just take one of those things, take one of these flyers from the door. There'll be people at the door offering these. And can I wish you a really great Christmas? And this Christmas, take the chance. If you're one of those people who has a tendency to just put Jesus in a box because you like to control him, perhaps allow him to shape you. Do what those wise men did and search him out. I'm going to hand back to Josh now.